Welcome to Statuary Hall. Our history fills this chamber. Our story as Americans. It's a story that's told in part through the statues that are around us. Farmers, inventors, war heroes who stood up for what they believed and dared to dream big. To them, it wasn't about title. It wasn't about job descriptions. It was about writing their own individual stories about their own individual pursuits, because they were all characters in a much larger story, a story of America's promise. What is America's promise? It's the promise that every man, woman, and child in America should have the freedom to pursue. A promise that no matter your background, your walk of life, you are free and empowered to choose your own unique version of the American dream. It's not a promise of perfection or a life without challenges, but it's a promise that you aren't limited to where you finish because of where you start. That is the promise of America. We see this promise through the sculpture, architecture, and artwork all around us. After all, this is where the People's House of Representatives first made its permanent home, where many of the early chapters about our great experiment in self-governance were first written. But even this place, right here, endured one of the earliest struggles to fulfill the American promise when it was engulfed in flames during the War of 1812. You see, there's always been a challenge to America's promise. It's the fundamental struggle between freedom and power that started the very day our Declaration of Independence was signed. A struggle between trusting people to make the best decisions for themselves or a government that decides for them. It's not a Republican or Democrat struggle, it's an American struggle. And it touches the very core of who we are, men and women who have written a story for more than 2 centuries about how together, we the people, win this battle to form a more perfect union. At that moment in 1814, when our struggle was seen through the burning timbers and the thick smoke in this room, it appeared that the promise of America had failed. That history had shown representative government was too weak to survive, that people couldn't govern themselves. But out of the ashes rose our capital, a temple of liberty, where that promise continued and people, through their elected representatives, were central to its fulfillment. Our capital is the home of the greatest inheritance our Western civilization has to offer. It's the greatest inheritance because it starts with people. Here in Congress, the people write the laws, assert the ultimate power over their government, and express their consent to be governed. For thousands of years prior, the power to make law resided in pharaohs and tribal chiefs, Caesars and dictators, kings and queens. Government was the realm of a few privileged, powerful people operating beyond the reach of the masses who were ruled. But then came the United States of America, where a new start was made, a ragtag group of believers seeking freedom from those who were trying to dream for them. We rejected the idea that the law is an instrument of special classes of people that are better or wiser or more powerful rulers. What started as a little promise of the people, by the people, and for the people grew into a great one. But today, Americans are anxious. Seniors fear retirement. Parents worry about the future success of their children. Students stress about finding careers to pay back their debt. Hard workers can't compete with the tangled web of taxes, one-size-fits-all regulations, and arbitrary rules. The reason they're so anxious and frustrated is because their voices aren't being heard. They're afraid they're losing representative government and the country they have known and loved. Over time, presidents have come to legislate by executive order. Over time, courts have come to make laws from the bench. And we, Congress, in our desire to avoid complexities and conflicts, have ceded power in order to simplify the process of lawmaking. So here we find ourselves again in the age-old struggle, a contest that will determine whether we shape our dreams or whether others shape them for us. The People's House is the seat of representative democracy, No other institution has such power because no other institution is as accountable to the people. Presidents can veto, Supreme Courts can strike down, but Congress has the exclusive seat of lawmaking power, not some guy in the basement of the Labor Department. We must assert that the people speaking through their elected representative is the best way to keep us free and protect our liberty and to make sure the promise of America exists for the next generation. What you'll find throughout history is that not much has changed. It's the same historic, reoccurring struggle between freedom and power that the Abraham Lincolns, the John Quincy Adams, the Daniel Websters all faced. It's the struggle between fulfilling the promise of America or breaking it. They knew the torch one day would be passed, where it resides with us, a daughter of a cherry farmer from Kettle Falls, Washington, a nurse from Tennessee, a businessman from Texas, an Air Force chaplain from Georgia, an author from Utah, a combat surgeon from Ohio. It's about this generation's responsibility right now to cherish, to embrace, to protect the fragile, carefully crafted American promise that puts people in charge through their elected representatives. It's our call to put aside any personal ambition so the next generation can have their individual power protected to freely pursue their version of the American dream. Let's use the power of the purse to make government bureaucracy more accountable to the people and less arrogant, so the IRS can't target free speech and the EPA can't regulate mud puddles. Let's do our job of reviewing, rethinking, and possibly eliminating government programs that are running on autopilot without oversight or authorization. So agencies like the VA operate their hospitals more like Cleveland clinics. Let's hold unelected bureaucrats accountable when they interfere with the next innovative startup being created in a garage or with a scientist working to cure cancer in a lab. Let's make agencies more transparent and closer to the people, a government that operates more like Uber and Amazon and less like the DMV. And most importantly, let's give people a voice through their elected representatives so a 19th century institution can actually solve 21st century problems. So today, I am grateful. I'm grateful for the efforts of my colleagues, Chairman Bishop, Chaffetz, Goodlatte, Rogers, and Sessions, who spent the last 6 months thinking through how the People's House can accomplish these goals on behalf of the men and women we represent. And I am inspired by my colleagues who have joined me this morning to answer the call from the people, to restore their voices in government and protect what our founders conceived: the most just system of government the world has ever seen. Our dreams and aspirations belong to us, not the government. Only we can push the heights of our imaginations, not the government. We know the power of our ideas, not the government. That is why freedom is so important. It isn't about political parties, personalities, or power. It never has been. It's about making certain the promise of America is never breached and knowing the only ones who can preserve it for the future and future generations are we, the people.
I'm Bob Goodlatte, Chairman of the Judiciary Committee. The Constitution is clear. It's the role of Congress to make all laws, the judiciary to interpret the laws, and the president to enforce the laws. This system was wisely set in place by our country's framers over 200 years ago because they knew firsthand that the concentration of power in the same hands was a threat to individual liberty and the rule of law. In recent decades, however, presidents of both parties have aggrandized their power and usurped Congress to legislate from the Oval Office. This is not a Republican or a Democrat issue. It's an American issue and touches the very core of our system of government. So today I am pleased to join with Speaker Ryan and Conference Chair McMorris Rodgers and my other colleagues in unveiling our Republican plan to reestablish the system of checks and balances created in the Constitution by our founding fathers. To reassert Congress's authority, we need to start where the Constitution starts, asserting Congress's authority over lawmaking. The very first sentence of the very first article of the United States Constitution begins, "All legislative power herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States." Key pieces of our agenda include reforming the Administrative Procedure Act, ending the Chevron deference doctrine that currently gives bureaucrats the benefit of the doubt when they interrupt statutes, requiring full and fair disclosure of the administration's regulatory agenda, and reasserting that Congress is the ultimate decision maker, regardless of whether they occur by statute or regulation. Fully half of the vetoes of this president has come of the Congressional Review Act resolutions disapproving of his regulations. When the president, to this degree, is blocking the will of the people through their elected representatives, it is clear that Congress, under Article 1, must strongly assert its constitutional powers. Today's federal administrative state is an institution unforeseen by the framers of our Constitution. It is rapidly mushrooming out of control. This overgrown bureaucracy is tipping our system of checks and balances away from the legislative and judicial branches and toward a stronger, emboldened, and overreaching executive. Our Republican plan takes common sense steps to protect our system of checks and balances and preserve liberty as the framers intended.
Hello, I'm Jason Chaffetz from Utah, and I really do appreciate the vibrant discussion we've had with our colleagues. I appreciate Kathy McMorris Rodgers, our conference chair, who's led us through this process, along with the speaker and majority leader, to really put forward a vision of where we should go and what we need to do. There's three things that I would like to just briefly touch on. This is truly the people's house. And if it's truly the people's house, we've got to maximize the sunlight. I believe sunlight is the best disinfectant, and it allows people the access that they need to their government. They pay for it, and we're here because of the people. And to execute on that in today's modern world, I guess we'd call it crowdsourcing. And if we're going to do our job, we got to make sure that they have the information at their fingertips. There are several ways we can do that. One is we have to strengthen the inspectors general. These are the nonpartisan folks, the career people who are able to get in and look under the hood. We have roughly 72 inspectors general that employ between 13 and 14,000 people. They have to have unfettered access to the executive branch and be able to follow through. You shouldn't be able to, for instance, just be able to quit your job as a federal employee and then the investigation's over. That happens time and time again. So we need to strengthen the inspectors general. We also need to strengthen FOIA. We did pass out this week the Senate version of the FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act. Proud to do that in a bipartisan way, in a good way. That bill is now on the way to the president's desk. I assume that the president will sign it, but it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure that that promise is actually fulfilled. And then the other thing that we have to do is strengthen subpoenas. See, the Congress has the right to see documents, to understand what the executive branch is doing. And we need to be able to strengthen and expedite the process by which when we issue a subpoena, it's not optional, folks. It's not an optional exercise. You come to Congress and testify, you got to come tell the truth. When you issued a subpoena, you must comply. And part of the game plan is to make sure that this is strengthened as well. Thank you, and it's an honor and privilege to serve, and I look forward to serving with my colleagues to make sure that we can make this country the best it can possibly be. Thank you.
Okay, I'm Rob Bishop, Chairman of the Resource Committee. On behalf of the church group in Washington who was denied their annual permit to have a picnic in a national park because the park land manager thought it would disturb the semblance and the serenity of the rest of the park. Or the Nevada family whose murdered son, they were not allowed to search for the body until they came up with $1 million bond to reimburse the park in case something happened. Or the New Mexico rancher who was denied a grazing permit because he gave a speech critical of the land agency. Or the Utah rancher who had to take out a water pond he built with his own money on his own land because it was attracting too much wildlife from federal lands who thought the drinking was good. Or the female outbackers in Wyoming who were photographed by BLM as they were going to the bathroom, as they were trying to come up with evidence of trespassing. Or the senior citizens who were allowed to go into Yellowstone in a lockdown because they'd already paid for the rooms, but were locked into the hotel and couldn't see Old Faithful. And then the armed guards, as they were leaving on the bus, refused to allow them to take pictures because that would be recreating, and they couldn't get off the bus for 2 hours even if they wanted to go to the bathroom. Those are the people of why we're doing this. This is not simply a battle between the executive and legislative branch over power. This is an issue of what happens. The executive agencies were designed to make decisions without dealing with that nasty concept of what people want or they need. Congress, on the other hand, has to run every 2 years, which means we have to talk to people. We have to understand what they are talking about. That's the nexus of what this is all about. It's the effort to find a way of actually empowering people. We will, among other things, and this is the first step of a lot of steps, make sure that every committee that authorizes goes through a plan of reauthorizing every committee, every organization, so we can look at what it does and what its powers. We will self-police ourselves with this document, so no longer will we give language that gives carte blanche to the agencies. We will establish what the parameters will be. We will put in language that will insist there is coordination between the agencies and local government, so locally elected officials by the people can have their voice also being heard. If we don't do this, if we don't insist that the rules and regulations have to be reviewed with us before they are implemented, not after, if we don't do that, people are going to be harmed. And if we do it, citizens are going to be empowered. That's the goal of this document. It is a better way.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here to talk about our proposals for a better way in America. I'm Keith Rothfuss from Pennsylvania's 12th Congressional District. You're going to hear it repeated today. Every American high school student learns there are 3 branches to our government: legislative, executive, judicial. The legislature makes the law, the executive enforces the law, and the judicial adjudicates disputes arising under the law. Over the last number of decades, there's been a dramatic shift in lawmaking power away from the people's representatives to unelected bureaucrats. The proposals being presented here today can't come soon enough. They can't come soon enough for the farmers, miners, consumers, and power plant workers I represent in Western Pennsylvania. People like a dad I met last December. He has 3 kids, aged 5, 3, and 1. He had a solid middle-class job that he could take care of his family back in December. He lost that job. He was in the coal industry, and he wants to know why Congress could not stop the regulations that stole his and his family's livelihood. His story is repeated by millions of Americans who have been hurt by the so-called experts in Washington who continue to churn out red tape without accountability. Those Americans want people from their area, their representatives making the laws, not the bureaucrats who live in a far-off capital. This idea goes to the heart of self-government and what we're pursuing here today. 35 years ago, President Reagan said, quote, "From time to time we've been tempted to believe that society has become too complex to be managed by self-rule, that government by an elite group is superior to government by, for, and of the people." Well, if no one among us is capable of governing himself, President Reagan asked, then who among us has the capacity to govern someone else? It is past time for a return to self-government through the people's elected representatives. Note well, restoring Congress's lawmaking role through initiatives such as the REINS Act will not end regulation. It will be the beginning of accountability for regulation. Members can vote to approve good regulations and vote against bad regulations. And if a member makes the wrong decision, the people can correct that at the ballot box. That's what self-government is all about. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm French Hill, and I represent the 2nd Congressional District in Arkansas. And this is a day we get to remind ourselves that 50% of the words in the Constitution relate to Article 1. Clearly, the founders considered the legislative branch the preeminent branch, the first branch. And as James Madison said in Federalist 51, though, all three branches are in competition, and when one gets a little too ambitious, the others need to counter that ambition. And today's project is all about countering the ambition of the executive branch. As a businessman for over 3 decades from Arkansas, I've seen firsthand the negative effects of an executive branch that bypasses Congress to either propose their own rules or to enforce laws in ways that were not intended, all without input of the American people. One example I've seen recently is dumbfounding to me, and that's the Waters of the United States rule. In Arkansas, it was enjoined with 9 other states from being implemented, but implemented it is being by the coercive effect of federal representatives to make private landowners incorporate the WOTUS rule into everything they do now, even though it's not the law of the land. That is federal overreach. In his last final State of the Union address, the President made a point to characterize too much regulation out of Washington as too burdensome on the American people. Well, Mr. President, the WOTUS rule is a prime example of overregulation. The law never intended for federal micromanaging in streams and ponds on private lands and farms in Arkansas. These are the types of situations that we need to tackle in this Congress. And as Congress follows our proposals today for a better way, we will successfully reassert our authority under Article 1. I congratulate Kathy Morris Rogers, proud to work on this project, and wish all the best for its success.
Good morning. I'm Doug Collins from Georgia's 9th Congressional District. I come from the Northeast Georgia mountains, and poultry is our biggest industry. In fact, we're the poultry capital of the world, and it's a thriving sector, and we're striving to not only meet the demands of America, but the world. But somewhere in many cubicles across Washington, they've determined that that's not good enough, and they're continually putting things in the way, putting cost and increasing the burden on our poultry industry. Somewhere along the way, the executive branch has forgotten it is their job to enforce the laws, not make the laws. If they would like to make the laws, then I encourage them to put their name on a ballot and run and not do it the wrong way. As a whole, the executive agencies seem to be more concerned with implementing a political agenda than actually enforcing the laws. OSHA, just recently, who is tasked with the basic health and safety of workers, a common and noble cause, is continuing to put in practices such as a wall-to-wall inspection implementation of poultry plants. This is not done for safety reasons. It's done simply to go in and cause a policy agenda to be driven. Everyone can agree that we need to ensure worker safety, but this policy is ridiculous and does little for safety, and it hurts jobs and productivity. These inspections do more harm than good because they simply slow down the facilities, hindering them from doing what they're supposed to be doing. But then also sometimes you just have to smile, not because something is right, but because something is just so ludicrous. Recently, the USDA issued organic rules for comment. These rules were meant to have little to do with food safety and are meant to address consumer perception. According to these new rules, chickens need sizable outdoor space for enrichment activities. The pastoral image of chickens roaming around the yards is all well and good in theory, but in practice, it's a costly change that would drive up cost to consumers and would also put grocery stores at a disadvantage. You know, it is so amazing, and I was even asked, what would happen to chickens in cold weather states? Would we have to give them jackets while they were outside? Nobody seems to know. Again, agencies run amok. The USDA's policy also puts people at risk because it actually contradicts avian influenza precautions that we have put in place that would be absolutely devastating to our economy and to our nation if we put our food source at risk. So you see, this is not simply about, is Congress better than the executive branch? It's about doing our job and doing it in the way that the constitutional founders said to do it. When we all do our job the way we're supposed to, the people are protected, the people are served, and our country is stronger for it. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is John Ratcliffe, and I represent the 4th Congressional District of Texas. The beauty of the American system of representative government is that every American is intended and meant to have a say. Laws are developed and voted on by the people that are chosen. Those are then interpreted by the courts and enforced as is by the executive branch. But in recent decades, the executive branch and its bureaucratic agencies have stepped far beyond the carefully designed balance of power by creating rules and regulations that have the same impact as law but go far beyond the scope of any existing laws. To this point, it's no secret that Texas will be particularly hard hit by the Environmental Protection Agency's Clean Power Plan. These regulations are anticipated to increase retail power prices in my home state by 16%. And when family budgets are already stretched too thin, they simply can't afford this rate hike. And unfortunately, these regulations are especially devastating to the 4th Congressional District that I'm grateful to represent. The local coal-fired power plants in my district have already announced that they simply can't afford to remain open if they're forced to comply. This means a loss of jobs. It eliminates an affordable source of energy for the folks back home, and it saddens me to see a circumvention of our Constitution by a ballooning administrative state have such a crippling impact on the American people. That's why I've introduced legislation to address this ongoing problem, and why I'm now teaming up with my fellow defenders of the Constitution here in the House to establish a strong plan aimed at restoring the balance of power that our founders intended. Texans and people all across this country deserve to have their voice restored. They deserve a better way. After all, we're here to serve them. It's not the other way around. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Mike Bishop, and I represent the 8th District in the state of Michigan. I want to thank the task force, the chairman and the members of the task force for their hard work on this important subject. And I want to say that the constitutional crisis that we're talking about today is really the primary reason why I decided to run for the United States Congress. Every year, unelected bureaucrats create thousands of onerous rules and regulations that in many cases supplant years of existing legal precedent and have full effect of law without ever being publicly debated, discussed, voted on by a single elected official, and without any input from the very people that they will directly impact. One specific example of the many is the Department of Labor's overtime rule. The rule doubles the salary threshold under which employees qualify for overtime. I'm concerned, the members of the task force are concerned, and the people that we represent are concerned that this was pushed through without consideration of the obvious known and very negative consequences. Not surprisingly, the final rule will likely lead to fewer jobs, less workplace flexibility, and fewer opportunities to climb the ladder of success. It impacts everybody, from the individual to the small business owner to our abundance of outstanding colleges and universities that serve the students across my state and across this country. To know that schools have to worry about a decision that was made miles away from them without any input, in many cases over their objection, may force them to cut hours and raise tuition is not how the American system was meant to work. Michiganians and the people across this country have a right to be concerned and frustrated, and they are. I'm uniquely aware of the concerns raised by parents across my district as a father of 3. I worry about every day the growing cost, the skyrocketing cost of higher education, as do many of you, and in general the higher cost of living. And under no circumstances should any government agency be making it harder and more costly for families, parents, students, or people of any walk of life to realize their dreams. This rule that I'm talking about right now is just one of many, and it's symptomatic of a far greater problem that is facing this country today. It's snowballed in recent years. It's time for a better way. It's time for us to enforce the Constitution. Article 1, Section 1, and Section 8 of the United States Constitution affirms the role of Congress very specifically, very directly, and unambiguously. It is responsible alone to legislate and pass laws. It couldn't be any more clearer. And it's exactly what the framers of the Constitution intended, to avert the style of government that they left to protect the American people from a top-heavy and tyrannical government. I'm proud to be a part of this task force, and I'm proud to be a part of its mission. Together we are going to give the voices back to the people that we represent and restore the powers of the Constitution as our founding fathers intended. Thank you.
It's great to be with you this morning. I want to thank all my colleagues that I had the pleasure of working with on this mission, if you will. I'm Brad Wenstrup. I represent Ohio's 2nd District. And I just want to tell you that our Constitution's not broken. It's not an outdated document that's to be ignored in this century, because it was carefully and deliberately crafted based on a guiding principle of we the people that set limits on the government, not the other way around, for the government to set limits on us. Our founding fathers laid out a specific framework for our federal government that was balanced on 3 separate but equal branches to ensure that we the people were heard and properly represented. But now we're at a point in our history where a largely unconstitutional 4th branch of government has taken root. It's an unelected bureaucracy. And the sprawling network of federal departments and agencies is churning out rules and regulations at an extremely unprecedented pace. These rules carry the force of law, but they've never been voted on by the people's representatives. So what happened to we the people? That's really the question that we have to ask. I know in Ohio's 2nd District, I'm hard-pressed to find anyone who hasn't felt the effects of our bureaucracy, especially when it comes to businesses. For example, take Seal Cop Industries in my district. Thanks to the recent overtime rule, which was never voted on by Congress, they're facing $250,000 in compliance costs. And for them, that means little growth, higher product prices, and for many of their employees, that means a demotion from a salaried position to hourly positions. What we have seen is an executive branch that issues orders that they say they don't have the authority to issue, but do it anyway. We see a Department of Justice that today decides which laws they want to enforce and which ones they don't. We see a Supreme Court that changes laws rather than sending them back to Congress to be changed. And of course, we see agencies that carry the rule of law. Ladies and gentlemen, if we truly want to put America on a better way, we need to restore the constitutional balance and put legislative power back where it belongs, in the hands of we the people, and that would be your hands. Thank you very much.
Good morning. I'm Bill Flores, and I represent the 17th District of Texas, and I'm also honored to serve as the chair of the Republican Study Committee. Hardworking American families are frustrated and they're angry with the government overreach that's coming out of unelected, unaccountable, out of control Washington bureaucrats. And today we're putting forth our plan, a better way to restore constitutional authority. In 2012, the Waco Tea Party contacted me to express concern about invasive informational requests regarding their application to become a 501c4 organization. The information the IRS was seeking would have been logistically and financially impossible to fulfill in the very short time period that the IRS gave them to comply. And this was after an extended period that the IRS set on their application. Our investigation revealed that the IRS was inappropriately targeting conservative groups like the Waco Tea Party all across the country. IRS bureaucrats led by Lois Lerner were abusing their power by putting politics and ideology above the law to threaten the freedoms and the liberties of hardworking Americans. This is unacceptable. The federal government must be held accountable to follow the law and to adhere to the Constitution. We have a duty to restore America's trust in their federal government. Today, House Republicans are leading the charge to protect hardworking Americans against government harassment by reining in unaccountable, out of control federal bureaucrats. Again, we owe it to our constituents to follow the wisdom of our nation's founders to restore Congress' constitutional authority by implementing a better way. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Bradley Byrne, and I represent the Gulf Coast of Alabama. In the Gulf of Mexico, we have a fish called the Gulf red snapper. Fun to catch, great to eat. And we're blessed to have plenty of Gulf red snapper out there. And for most of my life, we've been able to go out there on a summer weekend day and go catch some snapper. Now, you're limited to 2 per day, but you can catch enough snapper, and it's good eating. You don't have to worry about just having 2. And for most of my life, you could do it all summer long. Recently, in the last several years, a federal agency called the National Marine Fisheries Services has come forward and said, we're going to start limiting your snapper season to 9 days. This year, that snapper season was interrupted by a tropical storm in the Gulf of Mexico. So let me tell you, this federal agency has decided to take away from people that live on the Gulf Coast something that we've done for years. Now, they do it because they say there are not enough fish out there. Now, why did they say that? Because our scientists at the universities in the Gulf Coast say there are plenty out there. Here's why this agency says that. Because when they go to count these fish, they count them on sandy bottom. They don't count the fish on reefs. The Gulf red snapper is a reef fish. If you go and try to find the Gulf red snapper somewhere other than a reef, you won't find a red snapper. Now, we have brought this to the attention of these scientists that work for this agency, and they say we can't figure out how to count them on reefs. But the scientists at these lesser-funded state universities find them very easily and have shared their techniques with them, and still this federal agency won't do it. Now, here's the kicker. This federal agency receives $900 million. And it's an agency that has not been authorized by Congress since 2000. There is a better way. There's a rule of the House of Representatives that says we are not supposed to appropriate money to unauthorized agencies. Now, authorization is not just some superficial process we go through. It gives Congress, and the Congress is the representative of the people of this country, an opportunity to provide real oversight to what agencies are doing and not doing. So if we provide that sort of oversight, if we give the authorization process exactly the sort of attention it should get, then we can start reining in agencies that are doing things they shouldn't be doing, and then making sure that agencies that have appropriate jurisdiction, that they do their jobs and do it right. And if we do that in the case of the National Marine Fisheries Services, then we'll be able to restore an industry on the Gulf Coast, the industry of charter boats and people that supply things to people that go fishing. We can restore that industry, but more importantly, we restore the liberty of the American people to fish in their waters. And yeah, maybe we'll also catch a few fish. There's a better way. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Congressman Dan Newhouse from Washington State's 4th Congressional District. I'd like to applaud Speaker Ryan, Conference Chair Kathy McMorris, and join with my colleagues to restore constitutional principles and restore limited government in our republic. I am proud to be part of asserting the people's voice at a time of executive overreach, when Americans are frustrated with not being heard. The founders designed our system of government to be balanced. They reserved legislative authority to the people's representatives in Congress, not unelected officials of countless federal agencies. In my own state of Washington, we are seeing firsthand the effects of agencies pushing their own agendas that go against the will of the people through their elected representatives. In this case, the EPA awarded tax dollars for an anti-farm advocacy program, attacking the agricultural industry in direct violation of the law. This kind of government-sponsored abuse feeds a cycle of distrust, and it shows what happens when the lack of federal government accountability. Today, Congress is stepping in to say enough. Americans want to know that we will rein in these kinds of executive branch abuses and exercise our oversight and lawmaking authority granted by the Constitution. We commit to a better way, to restoring the rule of law and the separation of powers that are meant to keep the people in charge and their voices heard. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Hal Rogers. I represent Kentucky's 5th Congressional District, and I chair the House Appropriations Committee. The key to restoring Congress's constitutional authority is reclaiming the power of the purse. Our founding fathers spelled it out clearly in Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7 of the Constitution. Quote, "No money shall be drawn from the Treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law," end of quote. James Madison described this power of the purse as, quote, "the most complete and effectual way to obtain a redress of every grievance and to carry into effect every just and salutary measure." This is why it's critical for the Congress to retain and tighten its power over federal appropriations. It's one of the most basic duties that we have as Congresspeople and one of our greatest responsibilities. So how do we bring back this power into the hands of the people? First, Congress must pass all appropriations bills annually. Anything less cedes authority to the executive branch, undermining the principles of our Constitution. Both the House and the Senate must undertake internal reforms to remove any obstacles to passing these bills, including the 60-vote hurdle in the Senate. Whatever happened to rule by the majority? Next, we must address our nation's real spending problem: uncontrollable, automatic, skyrocketing, mandatory spending that makes up 2/3 of our federal budget. That can be done through overhauling the budget process to allow Congress to more effectively control spending on mandatory programs. Third, agencies and bureaucrats must be held accountable if they spend any dollar not specifically directed by Congress. Such actions are violations of federal law and must be treated as such. This also means bringing many outside agencies within the congressional appropriations and oversight process. And finally, we should aggressively and strategically use the tools that we already have, including limiting and conditioning funds to enforce congressional intent. The recommendations of this task force will help reclaim the constitutional power of the purse. It'll make sure that elected representatives who are accountable to their people and who know the needs of their districts the best are the ones to determine how federal funds are spent, not unelected bureaucrats. These recommendations will help improve the way Congress functions, give the American people more control over their tax dollars, and ultimately form a more perfect union as our founding fathers intended, because the founding fathers saw this as the better way. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Congressman Chris Stewart, and I represent the most beautiful district in the country, Utah's 2nd Congressional District. I believe our founding fathers got it right. I believe they were actually inspired when they set up 3 branches of government: one to create the law, one to enforce the law, and one to review the enforcement of that law. They set up a presidency, not a king. And they never intended that our federal regulators would rule over us rather than serve the people. Unfortunately, some of these executive orders and these rules have become muddled in recent decades. With the executive branch that pushes out rules and regulations and executive orders that have the same force as a law, but without the input of the American people. And these excessive rules and regulations hurt hardworking American families. And let me say that again. These excessive rules and regulations hurt hardworking American families. My district in Utah is a great example of that. We have 4 national parks, 2 national monuments, millions of acres of beautiful scenery that millions of Americans come to enjoy every year. But because of some of these excessive rules and regulations, it's made it impossible now for those outfitters and guides, because of a mandate requiring a minimum wage. Many of them are going to close. And it's going to hurt Americans who want to enjoy the great American West, because they're not going to have that option any longer. This increase in the minimum wage will force many of these recreational outfitters and guides to simply close their doors. And let me read you just one letter, or part of one from one such constituent. We very much want to maintain our commitment to the recreational experience in national parks and other public lands. However, the cost of compliance created by this rule have significant impacts on our business. This is so serious to us that we may have to cease running trips in national parks. And what a tragedy that would be if we actually close access or make it more difficult for Americans to come and enjoy these beautiful places. This is just one example. And there are many more that we could talk about. Repeated stories across Utah, across our country, where rules and regulations passed, as has been stated here many times, without accountability, do serious harm. And that's why I join with my colleagues in this effort to reclaim the power of Article 1 in the Constitution. I'll say it again, our founding fathers got it right. There is supposed to be a balance of power. The president and federal regulators have claimed power that they simply constitutionally do not have. It's time for the American people to reclaim that power. Article 1, the intent of the Constitution, freedom, the people, that's what this is about today. And so I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
It is a good morning. We are privileged to be in a place like this on a subject of this magnitude, and I'm Trent Franks. I have the precious privilege of serving as chairman of the Constitution Committee, so I'm especially gratified to Kathy McMorris Rogers and for those who help her for this invitation and for this gathering. The United States Constitution is the greatest man-made charter for human government in all of human history. It does not memorialize the rights of government as do most constitutions. Rather, it proclaims and safeguards the rights of the individual and limits government. It specifically guarantees the rights of life, liberty, and property, of which each individual cannot be deprived without due process of law. And from that foundation has extrapolated the most powerful, the freest, and most noble nation known to man. Our oath of office, sworn before Almighty God by members of Congress to support and defend the Constitution, sacredly binds each of us to that noble task. And yet certain rules and practices of Congress, unconstitutional executive orders, and legislating from the bench have become a mortal threat to the Constitution. It has indeed threatened our Article 1 powers of the purse. No one could possibly and more exquisitely articulate it than did Congressman Hal Rogers this morning. Accordingly, may we all both be inspired and admonished by the words of the great Daniel Webster when he said, "Hold on, my friends, to the Constitution." and to the republic for which it stands. For miracles do not cluster, and what has happened once in 6,000 years may never happen again. So hold on to the Constitution, for if the Constitution should fall, there will be anarchy throughout the world. I hope this will be a morning when all members of Congress will be deeply reminded of our sacred oath to the Constitution, and that each of us will recognize the treasure that it represents to the entire human family. Thank you.
Good morning. Pete Sessions, representing the 32nd Congressional District of Texas, Chairman of the House Rules Committee. When I came to Washington, I came to be a part of a grand experiment of constitutional government that I considered to be a responsibility of balance combined with the responsibility to live with and for the United States Constitution. You have heard today members of our body who are bringing together the ideas that they hear not just back home, but really the pulse of a nation. We believe that the American dream is in question. We believe that the American dream should be reevaluated because what made America great should also be what makes us greater in the future. Making government work for people is what we should be for. We not only look at the Constitution as the guiding force, but we want that balance and responsibility. For nearly 4 months, we have been working as a team. Ideas put forth by Speaker Ryan, made flesh and working by Congresswoman Kathy McMorris Rodgers, our conference chair. We've been working for 4 months on recommendations by listening to our members, by taking advice from people back home, and understanding that if we work together as a team, we can be successful. Our mission is to restore appropriate balance among the branches of government, exactly as our founding fathers intended, by reasserting the unique constitutional role of Congress. We believe that we must, as part of our responsibility, live up to our responsibility. Said another way, we are here to say we are upping our game, to do the things that are within our, not just responsibility, but within the context of what the American people expect. Each 2 years, we put our name on the ballot. Each 2 years, we go and define not only what we stand for, but the hopes and dreams of a grateful nation as we move forward. You have heard our members speak clearly about the things which must take place. And I will tell you, as chairman of the House Rules Committee, it is my job to work with our members to make sure that these ideas are put into law, that they are put into bills that can be understood by the American people with not only great intent, but purpose to make this great nation even better. You see, we believe there is a better way.
Good morning. I'm Diane Black. I represent the 6th Congressional District of Tennessee, and I'm honored to be here with my colleagues today to talk about a better way, to give the power back to the people's house and therefore to the American people. Almost every day I hear from Tennesseans who come to me in frustration because their lives and their livelihoods are being impacted by a government rule, cobbled together behind closed doors, away from public view, by bureaucrats they can't even speak to on the phone, let alone vote for. In fact, this month, my office met with Mayor Dale Reagan from Clay County, Tennessee. He manages a rural, sparsely populated county that was already struggling in the economy, and now they're going to get hit once again by the Department of Labor's overtime rule. Mayor Reagan tells me that this rule threatens to drain the county's education budget because it implements a new overtime pay schedule for nearly every teacher they employ. I cannot overstate how upset they were that they had no say as this rule came to be. And I told them, I am as frustrated as you are because the Constitution says that we in Congress should write the laws. Yet for the past few decades, the bureaucratic agencies have been legislating with regulations and rules that have the same force of law. This is just unacceptable. Instead of trying to stop bad rules once they've been announced, we in the People's House, and as a result the constituents we serve, should be a part of the process from the very beginning. And that's what today is about, offering a better way to restore our constitutional separation of powers and to reform our rulemaking process so that the American people, folks like Mayor Reagan and the people of Clay County, have a voice through their elected representative. Thank you.
First off, I'd like to start by thanking Kathy McMorris Rogers and the members of our task force for this very impressive work on this most significant part of our Better Way agenda. I thought I would close by quoting one of the greatest Supreme Court justices, Antonin Scalia. He once asked, "Why do you think America is such a free country? What is it in our Constitution that makes us what we are?" Well, most of us would probably say the Bill of Rights, the freedom of speech, freedom of the press, the right to bear arms. And true enough, those rights are very special. But Justice Scalia went on, "If you think a Bill of Rights is what sets us apart, you're crazy. Every banana republic in the world has a Bill of Rights. Even the Soviet Union had a Bill of Rights," he pointed out. And it promised a lot more than ours does. But there's a reason we don't remember the USSR as a bastion of liberty. Because that Bill of Rights was just, quote, "just words on paper," close quote, as Justice Scalia said. What truly makes America free, he argued, is the separation of powers. Those amendments to the Constitution may enumerate our rights, but it is the separation of powers that protects those rights, that secures those rights. Our country makes sure that no one person exercises too much power. I'm talking about the fact that we elect most of our representatives every 2 years. The fact that both houses of Congress have to pass a bill before it becomes law. The fact that Congress is elected separately from the president. That means a lot of people, a lot of different people, they have to agree for a bill to become a law. That means disagreement. It means debate. It means compromise. And in the end, it means good government. I also think it's very telling that when Justice Scalia talked about the separation of powers, he barely even mentioned the court, and he sat on it. Maybe what he was trying to tell us is this: we can't rely on the court alone to protect our rights. Because if you have to file a lawsuit, guess what? It's already too late. Your rights have already been violated. Being free doesn't mean you can get damages. Being free means you don't have to worry about your rights being violated in the first place. That's why we need the other branches of government, especially the legislative branch, to remain strong, so they can defend our rights when another branch attacks them. That is what will secure our rights in the here and in the now. And that is why we are here today. Our problem is not so much that the presidency, under both parties, keeps breaking the rules, though it clearly does. Our problem is that Congress, under both parties, keeps forfeiting the game, yielding to the executive branch, giving the president a blank check, not even bothering to read the fine print in some cases. And as our members just told us, as we just heard a beautiful articulation of our cause, this means more than just out of control spending. It means more chaos at the border. It means not being able to live out your faith. It means not being free. That's why this plan is so important. In fact, I would argue this is the most important part of our agenda. because we won't be able to fix our safety net. We won't be able to rebuild our military or pare back the red tape until we put the people back into the driver's seat. It's not enough to have an efficient or an effective government. We want a free government. One of the most important principles that unites all of us as Americans, that makes us a popular and inspiring nation, is that we are a historically self-determining people, historically with a government by consent. That's what unites us. That's what makes us free. That's what makes us the beacon of hope in the world. We must reclaim and conserve this principle. We want a confident America where all of us are free. And that is something that I think all of us can agree on. Thank you very much.